Hello, welcome to another Affaircare podcast. My name is Cindy Taylor, and I'm the co-founder here at Affaircare, along with my dear hubby David. David is the one who adds all the Affaircare designs and things at the beginning and end of the podcast, and throughout the podcast he likes to do that graphic design kind of stuff. Here I am in front of the camera. But anyway, our podcast today is regarding happiness and marriage, and specifically the podcast is about marriage is not about your happiness. So to start our topic today, I just want to kind of review, like really often amongst especially amongst people who have cheated, I'll hear that marriage is supposed to be, it's about my happiness, or I wasn't happy in my marriage, or I didn't feel loved. That you hear those kind of words from people who have been unfaithful. And I think to kind of get the ball started, our society views marriage as being I get married because it makes me happy and I feel loved. So you see how the emphasis in society about marriage is on you. It's like self-centered, right? And consequently, if somebody's marriage isn't making them happy, or if they don't feel adequately loved, then what happens is that they are in it's called a bad marriage, and the insufficiently happy spouse virtually has this imperative from society to leave that marriage and look for one in which they will feel sufficiently loved and happy. Sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 tries before they find one where they feel. And this is really making the commitment to my happiness rather than making a commitment to your spouse and making a covenant with God in the company of others to your spouse. Your commitment is to happiness rather than being committed to your spouse. So on today's podcast, I wanted to go over 3 main topics that have to do with marriage and happiness. So let's dive right in. Start with topic number 1. Your happiness does not depend on your spouse. Like all life, marriage is fundamentally about God. Marriage is what God says it is. And so we find happiness within ourselves by obeying God. And when we are in alignment with what God says marriage is within our marriage, we'll find our internal happiness. So much of the unhappiness that we feel is actually when we, somehow or another, it's connected with sin. So for example, it might be avoiding sin in the sense of, well, I know this is sin, but I'm going to justify it and kind of avoid admitting to myself that it's sin. It might be denying sin. For example, you know that it's, I know for a fact this is sin, but I'm going to deny it and pretend it's not happening. Or continuing in sin in the sense that, look, I know it's sin, but I like it, so I'm going to keep doing it. We're doing it even though we know better. When this is occurring, when we are continuing in sin, we will have internal dissonance. That is to say, it doesn't feel right, and you feel unhappy because part of you, this side maybe, let's say, is saying this is wrong, and this side of you is still doing it anyway, and it clashes, and that brings about unhappiness. Also, within our marriages and within ourselves, our spouses do not make us happy. Matter of fact, nobody makes us feel anything. I hear this quite often from people, like, she doesn't make me happy anymore, or, I keep trying to ask him, but he doesn't make me happy, or he doesn't make me feel loved. When we have an emotion, it is an emotion that we choose. Now, you may say, well, who in the world would ever choose to be unhappy? But in real life, we do make the choice. It's like everything else. There's a positive and a negative to the choice that we make. So we may say, I choose to be unhappy the payoff would be that you get people's pity. You may now all of this is done internally, and it's so fast. Usually we feel like it just happened, but in real life there is some thought going into it where we make a choice. And as adults, we are responsible for our own self and our own feelings. As an example, people who were in the Holocaust, both Christians and Jews alike, they're sent to the prison camps, and they were placed in a position of essentially torture, starvation. It was not a good thing. But they could still choose to be happy in the place that they were, rather than giving in to, and I don't mean just like being optimistic. I mean, they make a choice. The Lord put me here. I'm still alive. Therefore, I'm going to be happy. So our spouses do not make us happy, and we need to stop turning to them for our happiness. Our happiness is an internal thing that happens within us when we obey God. So if you're not happy, I would suggest that you look, rather than saying, well, my spouse doesn't make me, don't look at someone else. Look at your own self. Look at your own life. What is it about yourself or your life that is causing the unhappiness? It may be a sin that you're doing. And bear in mind, I'm not putting blame here. It may be a sin that you're doing. It may be a sin that you see your spouse doing that it does cause you to be unhappy because you don't want to see them sin. It may be something, the way that life is set up, such that you're an adult and you're choosing, look, the benefit here is that I get people's pity, so you're choosing to be unhappy. So rather than basically blaming your spouse for yourself, look to yourself, look to your life, and then if you want to be happy, build that. Okay, here's where I am now. Here's where happiness would be, is over here. How do I get there? And then build that. Okay, point number 2 is that your happiness does not depend on your marriage. Again, this is sort of a misunderstanding that people have, an error, that marriage is all, as we were discussing, that marriage is all about your happiness, and being married will, make you happy and that kind of thing. So let's look at our marriage vows. Now, everybody's marriage vows are a little bit different, but most marriage vows include some aspects that are pretty similar. For example, there's usually something in there about forsaking all others. That would be you're standing up in front of your friends and your family and before God, and you're saying, I'm dedicating myself to this one person, and I will not be turning to any others anymore. There's usually something in the vow about that. There's also usually something in there about until death do us part. Again, the idea of the vow, people have worded it different ways, but the idea of the vow is that I'm really going to stick with you. This is a covenant, and that the only way we're getting out of this is if we die. So it's a serious and long-term commitment. And then another common part in the marriage vows are usually something like better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health. Okay? The reason those parts are in there is that because marriage, like life, it's fundamentally about God, and so marriage has better times where things are going well, and marriages have worse times where things are not going so well. And these times are going to come. Likewise, richer or poorer. Some people happen to be, like they're born with a silver spoon in their mouth and they're pretty much going to be richer most of their life, but they may squander it all, in which case they would be poorer. For most, average, normal Americans, there's going to be days when you feel like, I'm happy I have it all. And other days when you feel like, I can't even pay this bill, and you're upset and you're feeling poor. Maybe you lost your job. The reason this part is in the vows is because these things do. Life comes, and really marriage may very well be about some suffering, and it's not necessarily for anything that you've done wrong. Are you happy in the worse, poorer, and sickness part? I know I'm not. When things are the worst, I feel sad. When we're poorer, I feel sad and somewhat frustrated. And when either one of us is sick, myself or dear hubby, again, I feel sad. This is not leading to happiness. It's not happy to eat bologna sandwiches every day or mac and cheese for dinner. But sometimes this is part of suffering, a part of what marriage is. And again, it's not necessarily because you did something wrong, like a punishment for sin, but what it is it's a marriage is a thing that occurs in your life designed to help you get to know God better. And in his wisdom, sometimes he realizes that you may need to do some suffering in order to love him more. Happiness and love within the marriage mix does not just organically arrive. It's not just, oh, it just came naturally. Now, sometimes it does, and it's a little easier if you have a partner with whom you're very, very compatible, but not always, and honestly, not usually. It arrives, that is to say, happiness and love arrive when you build it by obeying God and honoring your commitment. The more you obey God, the more you honor your commitment, the happier you'll be and the more love there'll be. Marriage is a covenant that's honored by working at being soulmates. You want to be a soulmate with your spouse? Then build that with them. It's honored by having intimate, heart-to-heart discussions in the warmth of acceptance, knowing that you are accepted for who you are, what you think, what you feel. And it's also in hearing the value and praise and understanding that is like the highest that this earth has to offer. Obviously, we're not in heaven yet. We're here on earth. But when a spouse really knows you and values you in spite of yourself, and when they understand you, that's the highest that this earth has to offer. That's what happiness is in a marriage. Okay, so the final topic then is that marriage is for holiness. And we've sort of touched on this a little bit. Marriage is a lifelong covenant that actually is a sacred discipline. And the goal, if you will, of the sacred discipline is to help you to know God more, so that you know him better, you know what he thinks, you know what he wants you to live like, you know his thoughts. And the goal is to love him more deeply and to trust him more fully, in spite of the way the world looks at it, which is my happiness and my, me being loved, me. In real life, love is about serving God in the way that when he says this is what marriage is, you serve him by actually doing those things, but also serving your spouse. You see how the emphasis there is outwardly turned to the other person, not your happiness. And likewise, it's about loving your spouse, not being loved. So for example, you will spend your lifetime learning about the other person, your spouse, to learn how to love them well. The emphasis again is externally focused to the other person. And again, this is honoring God because you are obeying what he says. Now, on our blog, I will list all the little items I'm going to mention, but also the verses that go with them to support why these are. But for man, a marriage is about loving, cleaving, embodying faithfulness, leading, self-sacrifice, knowing, honoring, and serving. And again, I'll put the verses on the blog page on our website. For a woman, the wife, marriage is about helping, cleaving to your spouse, by the way, loving, respecting your husband, submitting, obeying, serving, and adorning herself in a modest way. So, in conclusion, if you are unhappy, I would recommend that rather than looking to others to make you happy, or looking to your marriage to make you happy, again, you're focusing at, like, it's all about me. The point of marriage is to obey God and to get to know him better. And that is the whole purpose of being a married person, is that you learn to focus on God and serving and loving another. So turn your view 100%, 180 degrees, and begin to look at your own self and say, what are the areas where I need to work? on changing the marriage so that I am doing my side of the work. Your spouse may or may not choose to do their side of the work. That's between them and God. But you need to work on your own self. And if you're not happy, build the happiness and build the love with your own spouse. So again, thank you so much for taking a quick minute to listen to the podcast. I hope it was helpful to you. And we look forward to having you every week, every Friday. If you have a suggestion, I'm really open to suggestions. You can always contact us at affaircare@gmail.com. And that goes to both dear hubby David and me. Likewise, we have a contact page on the website. If you want to just come to affaircare.com and see the contact page, that gets through to us as well. But likewise, yeah, leave us your suggestions. We would love to, discuss on the podcast the things that will be helpful to you. So again, thank you so much. Hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.